Oh, there we go. Okay, unmuted. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Stratergy Saturdays. We're gonna get ready. We're gonna continue playing as the British Empire in Empire Total War. And, we're gonna talk about colonial North America. So, here we go. Hold up. There we go. Alright, y'all seeing the pretty pictures? Y'all seeing the game? I'm gonna try to be reading the chat while I'm playing, but I haven't quite figured out that UI. Okay, I see at least the pretty pictures are showing up here, so this is the eastern seaboard of North America. And, you know, we shouldn't start here, right? We're gonna start our story way further back. We are gonna have videos coming soon based on the book Intimate Direct Democracy by Modibo Kadali, which discusses this time period from kind of an Afro-Indigenous centered perspective. But my perspective is, you know, I'm of English heritage. You know, we learned about Jamestown, Colony, in elementary school, and you know, my mom actually baked scones and made tea and came and was like, yeah, this is what the English settlers were eating. And then we brought out the cranberries and the cornbread, and it's like, here are the American things. The indigenous things. But this kind of all ties into, I'm going to try and play quicker this time too, to kind of get through these turns and get through the campaign, so we can play some other campaigns. But I feel like North America is a little bit wide open. You got these pirates and stuff. I'm trying to sweep through these areas that are going to have kind of smaller cities. Get all this, Canada. And then we can come back here and mess around. I mean, France is strong on the continent. I should be worried about France. But if there's one thing we know about France, it's they will surrender, so I'm just kidding. Alright, let's keep going. So yeah, we're gonna talk about not just the history of this time period, but the historiography. How do we tell this story? You know, when kids are told the Jamestown story. When we watch the movie of Pocahontas, you know, there's a lot of different narratives that kind of obscure the violence that was going on. And yeah, we're gonna talk about that. You know, I've mentioned how in a big way I was inspired to make this channel partly as a response to this moral panic around critical race theory, right? Which is really a moral panic against critical historiography. And critical historiography is so important to be developed and understood. So when there are initiatives like the 1619 project, for example, that was, you know, conservatives took that and were like, oh, they don't want to teach anything before that. They don't want to teach Jamestown. They don't want to teach. It's like, no, of course kids should learn about Jamestown and the early English colonies, and we'll talk about that today some. But the point of the 1619 project was kind of to say, instead of starting at the Revolutionary War for America, and instead of it being based on like our nation state nationalist narrative, you know, we should be recognizing our America as like the product of all these different people groups who ultimately, you know, came together. Africans, Europeans, and indigenous Americans ultimately, you know, came all in the same place in 1619, sort of, when people, that was, the idea was that was when people were brought here, but, you know, as we read in the book, Intimate Direct Democracy, people were here even earlier than that. African people were marooned in the Great Dismal Swamp by the pirate Sir Francis Drake in the 1580s. And they created a community out there that, you know, thrived in the swamp and resisted the encroachment of slavery for a while. This is tricky. I don't have like any money. I guess I'm spending it all somewhere and then getting distracted.
Fleet ready. Set sail. Jump to it and look lively. Reef sails.
All right. Let's see. What can we do? We can't do a whole lot because we just don't have money. Right, so that was like 1586. Jamestown gets founded, I want to say 1607. Check my timeline here, 1607. And, you know, in between there, you've got the Roanoke colony, which famously disappears. And it's a mystery for a long time, you know, what causes that to happen. So let's see here. One of the interesting details is, you know, that that the word Croatan is found, you know, marked into a tree near the site of where the Roanoke colony used to be when they returned later to go and resupply. And that's like, you know, the lone clue of, you know, what happened to this settlement. So Modibo Kadali suggests that it may have fallen to Afro-Indigenous resistance based in the Great Dismal Swamp in North Carolina, right about here. That's not necessarily for sure, but you know, it's like they were around there, and you know, would have had beef with tobacco planters. Although I guess it would have been a while until the tobacco plantations really started up. And another thing to understand is, you know, this is the time period during which the whole plantation infrastructure that becomes kind of the blueprint for the antebellum South comes into being. All of, you know, you got the transatlantic slave trade, of course, happening at this time, where people were being sold from West Africa, being brought over especially to the Caribbean, even more than to North America. To the Caribbean, Brazil, and to a lesser extent North America. And like the context in which slavery became the way that it was before the Civil War in America, very racialized, very dehumanizing. That's not the reality of slavery all through the history of human slavery. That is a very particular form that developed out of the sequence of sort of these continuous rebellions, and trying to keep, the planters trying to keep the slaves down. There was a point at which the majority of slaves in these colonies were indigenous people, and especially early on with the Spanish Empire in the mines down in South America. But during these different wars that I'm going to talk about today, you basically had indigenous people frequently escaping slavery and escaping to their people out in the local environment. And so they created really formidable resistance to the enslaved labor farming system. And that led to this sort of divide and conquer strategy where they wanted to pit tribes against each other. They wanted to make sure that tribes didn't link up with enslaved Africans and help them, because if they did, they could be a very powerful force. Knowing the land, knowing having a lot more motivation to fight for their own freedom than some of these redcoats or slave patrols or whoever was trying to keep them in line. So I'm talking about stuff like the Yamasee War, the Tuscarora War, and let's just get into those things. Like France, England, and Spain were all kind of vying for these North American territories, like you're seeing right here. And let's see, can we...
We shall win. We are triumphant.
So they would both be having Native American proxy allies against each other, kind of like that.
Troops,
and they would be raiding each other. So like for a long time the Yamasee were allied with the English, and they were selling buckskins to the English, which was a very important part of the colonial economy at that time, before the plantations had spread as much. The frontier economy was based on trade with the indigenous people, and especially the trade in furs and buckskins. That's where, how Americans call $1 a buck? If you got $1.50, that's from a buckskin. A buckskin was roughly the equivalent of, some number of British pounds, and that was the currency that they used when pounds weren't available. So going back to the 1619 project, I hope that you're already beginning to see part of why starting our narrative of American history at the American Revolution is an issue, because it's convenient to the government, who would like to focus on independence and liberty and you know, things that
Orders
validate
received and
kind of
understood.
our national narrative.
Your
But
orders, Your
if
Majesty.
we want to really understand the American system and the system of government and economy that came out of this time period to create
Sir,
what eventually transitioned over into the American government, like, this is when it's coming into being, and structural material forces are shaping it. It wasn't really totally reshaped by the American Revolution. The people who were in charge of the American new American government, they may not have been part of the British government in England, but they were very much already the main people in the colonial government by that time. You know, people like George Washington. George Washington was a general for the British before the American Revolution. He fought on the British side against the French
even way, boy.
in the 7 Years' War, which in America is also called the French and Indian War. Quick check for if anybody's saying anything. I'm glad we got some watchers, it looks like. Alright. Oh, this is not good. The Inuits are about to whoop our butts, so I'm not even gonna try that one. There's no winning that. Interesting. I was almost gonna give up on this campaign now. It's like, I didn't have that bad of a start. This is a fun one.
Push them
We'll see.
aside.
Let me see if I can recover all this.
Huzzah! Huzzah! Forward!
I say recover. I've been expanding this whole time, but possibly a little too slowly.
Sir, your orders? Immediately! Men! Forward! Forward! Up! Make ready! Run out the guns!
Okay. I'm far from my dreams of getting these little islands before the Spanish or someone else get them. But it can still happen. Oh man, did France get Cuba? No, I think it's just the way that it looks. No, they didn't. That would be bad. Alright.
Yes, sir.
They look a little too strong to
March!
head on apply directly to the forehead right now.
Aye, aye, sir. For country, for honor, and for the prize! Prepare the troops for battle!
Oh no.
Withdraw! Drop
I guess the
anchor.
naval battle
Men!
was not good for me.
Forward! Yes, my lord. Get ready for battle!
Alright, how about that? The Acadians. So these people I'm about to fight now are the Acadian rebels, which, like, the Acadians are the ancestors of the Cajuns that live in, you know, Louisiana, maybe parts of Mississippi. Like, that's that culture comes from that part of French Louisiana that went all the way up to Quebec in Canada. And in this case, when I took it from the French, I just did not leave enough troops there, so they got a little uppity. Let's see what we can do. There she is. stuff. You know, there were all these little tiny states in the Holy Roman Empire because Germany had not formed yet. And Hesse was one of the ones, like Hanover, kind of over near Holland, that was closely affiliated with the British royal family. The British, you know, house of... It might have been a different house at this point. It probably was before the current house, but right now the United Kingdom is ruled by the House of Hohenzollern, which is a German family. And they married into these various dynasties that existed in the Holy Roman Empire. So these were famously, not these are all red coats, but the Hessians are famously the kind of elite mercenaries that were called out during the American Revolution. They were supposed to be the like highly esteemed troops from sort of like the British version of the Swiss Guard. Yes, do not worry. We are going to cover the indigenous people in this region very extensively too. That would be we support free association. Unsubscribe. Be excommunicated.
Line infantry!
Indigenous troops fighting alongside the Cajuns here. You know, this is indigenous societies are sometimes portrayed as like completely distinct and separate, but they often were interacting, intermarrying, you know, and even assimilating, you know, in the European towns, you know, to varying degrees. Like this was an issue. This was a political issue amongst indigenous groups. How much to assimilate? For the Muskogee, you had like the Red Sticks who were very against assimilation, whereas others were, you know, for it. Buckskins kind of came to, like, the British were kind of, and by that I mean individual British traders, you know, were like repeatedly kind of cheating in their trades with the Native Americans. The colonial government was trying to actually do diplomacy with them and have treaties, but it didn't work when, you know, random people were going out, random Britishers were going out into the frontier and just acting autonomously without regard to that diplomacy. And it peaked actually in a meeting where this one guy, you had these two guys who were both delegates, and they had different interests, so it was kind of a compromise to make them both delegates, right? One wanted war, one wanted peace. And the one who wanted peace, pretty much, you know, they had this meeting, they went to the Yamasee town of Pocatopia, and the one who wanted peace pretty much did a great job. Like, they had a feast, they had a treaty, and they had a good discussion. They pretty much came to an agreement and started to go to sleep. And then, for some reason, this has to be one of the worst moves in history. Another guy comes out, you know, and he's drunk, very drunk at this point, and he threatens them all that they're gonna kill them all, and basically goads them into war, and then just goes to sleep in their town. So they actually killed him, and I don't know. He might have said this when everybody else was asleep, and then they killed him while he was still awake. I'll have to brush up on the details, but the point is they massacred the British people in that town after that, and that is like a spark that kind of sets things off. But like, it's a response to, you know, they basically are feeling at this point like the English are totally two-faced. They make a treaty, and then some English people come and violate the treaty right away. And this was like the most insane example of that, where they're like, okay, we literally got both of you guys right here, and you're telling us two different things to our face. And one of those things is that you're gonna burn our villages and, you know, take everything. So, you know, you can definitely understand the frustration. But yeah, those people were ritually tortured. Like, they were the Yamasee, and there were other tribes who would do things like this. You know, they kind of
Prepare for battle.
you know, tortured them as they killed them. But so that's during that one incident, that massacre, right? And over the course of the war, the Yamasee, who, like, at one point they were raiding other tribes to enslave them, to sell them to the British, right? Along with selling the buckskins to the British. They kind of, during the experience of this war, wind up having to break their own people out of British slavery, and in the process wind up breaking out African slaves. And then, you know, now they're a mixed Afro-Indigenous community where some people are very anti-slavery. And, you know, the whole attitude of the community changes pretty quick. So that is how the Yamasee became sort of an abolitionist fighting force, kind of. And, you know,
Enemy fleet ahead. Disengage. Destination ahoy.
So yeah, in Intimate Direct Democracy, Dr. Kadali argues that there's probably a very strong cultural link between the people who we'll talk about soon, who the Seminoles and the people of Fort Mose, and onto the Great Dismal Swamp via the fighters in the Yamasee War, or that either way this is like an unbroken sort of chain of resistance to slavery going down the coast, kind of. Let's see here. I'm gonna run from that one.
Drop anchor.
So with Jamestown, when it does start to get established more, they start growing cash crops. They start, bringing in enslaved people and indentured laborers to grow those crops, and this spreads over the Piedmont, like Virginia, South Carolina. They're growing lots of crops, and when they're growing tobacco, it kind of devastates the soil. So they're having to keep moving inland to keep going over more and more soil, because the old soil is getting ruined, so they have to keep moving, and that's part of the economic motivator behind constantly expanding and taking more indigenous lands. The Spanish Empire was a lot more religious in their attitudes. They wanted to convert people, and that was like more than bringing more and more people in. That was how they grew in Spanish Florida. That was an important part of how they maintained enough people to kind of... It was an important part of it, especially because the settlers who came in to Florida settled very close together, and so they weren't able to really cover the country like the crown wanted them to, like they could with kind of the complementary addition of indigenous people being subjects to the crown of Spain. Like they were living kind of distributed across the land, and that gave the crown a little more of ability to control Florida, which they always struggled with. And that's why ultimately it was signed over to the U.S. in the Treaty of the Adams-Onis Treaty in 1819. But that's after the period that we're pretty much talking about today. One factor in this that Dr. Kadali talks about also is that, in Spain you have the history of being ruled by Moorish Muslims from North Africa. So that history of Moorish rule, is part of why for Spain their empire was defined by religion and by opposition to Islam and Protestantism, more so than being more ethnic, because they were already coming from a pretty ethnically mixed society where a lot of people had a lot of Arab heritage, but if they were Christian, they were more on the side of the crown. So yeah. see here. I'm struggling with trying to figure out how to... Here. We only need those few there.
Anything more?
They can hold it down. And then we can get a few more. Let's get all of them.
Ready and waiting for orders.
Together they will probably they can do that. Okay. Now we're cooking with grease. I would say additionally, the mindset of English colonists was, uh-oh, I took too many troops out of Boston now. That's not good. Uh-oh. But you know, the Spaniards tended to have a mentality that was more focused on religion and political control, whereas the British, a lot of British settlers were coming over with an economic mindset where they wanted to come over here to set up enterprises to make lots of money. And you know, due to the influence of philosophers like John Locke, even on a state level, that the macroeconomics of it was more of a concern for state planners compared to the Spanish state planners, who saw it in a much more old school way of, you know, take the land, get the metals. But with the advent of capitalism as an economic theory, it became much more sophisticated financially in terms of build the capital. It doesn't matter if it's gold or land or tobacco or cotton, white gold, right? Just make that money was the mindset. And the Protestant work ethic was also a part of this, right? That's a cultural difference between England and Spain during this time that's very important. You know, like I said earlier, the French Wars of Religion and the Protestant Reformation are so recent at this point that it's like, we gotta take Boston back.
Victory!
It's like that's at the top of people's mind, really. You know, the King of England would at certain points see the Spanish as like, you know, they're in league with the devil. They're, you know, both of them would sort of have the mindset that I'm on the side of the God and the other sect is on the side of the devil. They're heretics. And like I said last time, then you would have pirates who would just kind of flip the whole table on that discourse and say, I'm on the side of the devil, because I don't care about any of your moral rules. And that's kind of crazy. But that's definitely contributes to the discourse environment where people like Thomas Jefferson could later say, oh, I believe in like a mechanical God. I'm a deist instead of a Christian, so my God is like, you know, just kind of manifested by physical laws of nature and stuff. yeah. Um, we're gonna do a whole episode on Jamestown. I really skipped over that. I feel like too much. The so often we teach just about the feast, right? And everybody kind of holding hands, kumbaya. That's one version that elementary schoolers get. Probably because it's uncomfortable to, nobody wants to have to explain to a child, like, here's how our country is founded on genocide, right? That's a hard conversation. But it is a necessary one. And, if we're just talking about the feast, which did also happen, right, that would be a very selective part of the story that we're telling, because following the feast, which can be interpreted as kind of an alliance making thing, rather than just kind of common humanity. Like, they wanted to make an alliance, right? And they did for a while, and then they went to war, and the Pequot massacre happened, where hundreds of people were killed by the Jamestown colonists. And you got John Rolfe, right, who's the good guy in the movie Pocahontas. In real life, he did marry a girl named Pocahontas, but she was underage, so he was a pedophile. And that's kind of crazy too. That's definitely not in the Disney movie. You get the sense that she kind of was like this reluctant sort of trophy wife. It was like he was parading her all around Europe, and how much choice did she actually have on, am I going to Europe or am I going to going home? Probably shouldn't have played this one. It gave me good odds, but the sieges tend to be a little broken. I let these Americans breathe too much. They've got considerable land now, but I'm gonna be gaining some ground on them at least. Oh man, we can't put ladders on this either. Oh, that was a mistake. I really should have. My cannon's not even reaching it at all. I think I screwed up here, guys. I really screwed up with playing this battle out instead of auto-resolving. definitely represented a messed up imperialist system. The problem, though, with kind of taking that and, using Revolutionary War symbolism, to kind of glamorize the American side is that, we're sort of heirs to that imperial system. America didn't really, change that or fight against that in its independence. And there are little inklings where it could have in certain ways, but it didn't. In the end of the American Revolution, we'll talk about this a lot more, but there was basically a meeting, between George Washington and the major generals of the Continental Army, where they figured out how to set up a new system where rich landlords like George Washington would continue to be in charge, and the army would not wind up joining all these further rebellions like Shays' Rebellion that were breaking out in the aftermath of the American Revolution. Although that's, we gotta talk about, the relationship of all this to the indigenous people, too. So, like I said, the British were trying to enforce treaties, particularly during the American Revolution, the Proclamation of 1763, which limited Western expansion. So that was a major way that the populist outrage coming from the bottom, from the frontiersmen there, was partly let us steal more indigenous land. That makes it complicated. That makes it a little more nuanced than, good patriots versus bad redcoats. Of course, the British they weren't indigenous freedom fighters. Strategic disposition towards what land they felt like they could take at what times. And at that point, they felt it was not in their interest to keep it first, and the Americans did. morning, ICE has killed another person in the United States, and you know, that is something that we should look at and think back to stuff like the Boston Massacre. You know, we should be feeling the kind of outrage that people were feeling about the Boston Massacre, because these are government agents just gunning people down in the streets, and they are crass about it. They are not gonna stop. So people need to make them stop. That's my humble plea to Americans today. This is a history show, but we're in history right now, and I don't want people to forget that. Soon, where they survive all this. I'll call this one the last battle for today. Thanks for watching. There's so much more to talk about. I wanted really good content to go into finished series. Uploaded on the YouTube, not a live stream. But keep following the live stream to follow my campaign. We might be able to make this one work. We might be able to win. We'll see. I'd like to finish campaigns, but we'll see if it takes too long. Stuff got so crowded in there, I stopped knowing what I was doing. We're gonna win it, but we're not gonna win it as strongly as we could have. Look at all those cavalry. That's bad. That's good. They're great. Heroic victory for bread. Alright, thanks for watching, y'all. Tune in next time. And sorry for missing whatever Wednesday. I mean, yeah, hate to start with a mix-up like that, but we'll start whatever Wednesday pretty soon too. Because there's a lot of games that aren't Total War that deserve a little bit of love on this broadcast. Alright, we got Boston, we got New York. I think they're running scared. There's not any 13 colonies left for me to take over, but we'll get them. We'll get them back. Alright, thanks guys.